There was a room at Clarence House no one entered without her. Not the maids, not the private secretary, not even the men who came from the palace with their leather folders and their careful voices. I worked in that house for 19 years. I saw the door open perhaps 4 times. What was inside was not gold. It was not jewels. It was paper. Letters mostly. And one thing she asked me to burn the week before she died, a thing I did not burn. People believe they knew her. The smile, the gin, the horses, the soft grandmother of a nation. They knew the door. They never saw the room. This is what was behind it. Her name was Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon. The country called her the Queen Mother. Inside the household, we simply called her Her Majesty, and we lowered our voices when we did. She was born into the old aristocracy, not the throne. That distinction mattered to her more than anyone outside the family ever understood. She did not inherit power. She married into it, watched it nearly collapse, and then spent 70 years making certain it never collapsed again. By the time I joined her staff, she was already a legend, and legends are convenient. A legend does not have to explain herself. A legend can smile at a garden party and let the smile do the work of 100 denials, but a household sees the seams. We saw the mornings that began at 11 and the evenings that did not end. We saw the way certain names were never spoken at her table. Wallace. That name, above all, was a closed door. And we saw the ledger she kept, not of money, but of loyalty. Who had stood by the crown in 1936? Who had wavered? She forgot nothing. She forgave selectively. The public loved a woman who seemed to have no enemies. The truth is, she had many. She simply outlived them. And history is written by those who remain in the room after everyone else has gone. She remained in the room for 101 years. The question I have carried since is a simple one. What does a person protect so fiercely that they would guard it for a century? The answer was behind that door. To understand the locked room, you must understand 1936. Everything in her life bent around that year, the way a river bends around stone. Her husband was not meant to be king. He was the second son, a shy man, a stammering man, a man who had been told his whole life that the throne belonged to his brother. And his brother, the eldest, was the golden one, charming, modern, adored by crowds and cameras alike. Then his brother chose a woman over the crown, an American, a divorcee, and in a single winter, the burden that was never meant for her husband was dropped onto his shoulders, and, though no one said it aloud, onto hers. She watched her husband take a role he had never wanted and never been prepared for. She watched him struggle to speak in front of the nation. She watched the strain settle into his face, and later, into his lungs. In the household, we understood the arithmetic she never spoke. Her husband died at 56. She believed, quietly, absolutely, that the abdication had cost him those years, that the man who walked away from the throne had, in walking away, handed her husband an early grave. That is the wound beneath the smile. Not jealousy, grief with a target. So when the country met a warm, twinkling grandmother in pastel coats, they were meeting a performance built over a lifetime. A performance so complete that she may have believed parts of it herself. Underneath was a woman who had made one decision and never revisited it. The crown would survive, whatever it cost, whoever it cost. She raised 2 daughters inside that decision. One would become queen and carry the weight without complaint. The other, the younger one, would spend her life pressing against the walls of it and paying for every push. The old aristocracy she came from had rules. A woman of her rank did not display feeling. She did not settle scores in public. She endured. She smiled. And she kept her accounts privately. The Queen Mother took those rules and made them armor. And every family with armor has a room where the armor comes off. For her, it was the room at Clarence House. That is where the letters lived, correspondence going back to the 1920s. Notes in her own hand that were never sent. And, this is the part the biographers never had, a file concerning the woman whose name was never spoken at her table. The abdication was not merely history to her. It was an open case. She kept evidence. She kept it for 66 years. I did not understand why until the week she asked me to destroy it. By then she was very old and very tired, and the performance had grown thin at the edges, the way a coat worn for decades finally shows the lining. In those last months, she said things she would never have said in her prime. One afternoon, near the window, she looked at the box that held those papers, and she said something I have never repeated to anyone. I will repeat it now, but not yet. You have to understand what was in the box first. It was late winter. Her health was failing in the slow, dignified way of the very old. Nothing dramatic, only a gradual withdrawal from the world she had commanded for so long. She called me in one morning. This was not unusual. I had served her long enough to be trusted with small, private tasks. But her manner that day was different. She was not giving an instruction. She was, and I choose this word carefully, confessing. On the table beside her was the box. Rosewood, brass-cornered, older than I was. I had seen it moved from the locked room perhaps twice in 19 years. She rested her hand on the lid, the way a person rests a hand on something living. She told me she wanted it burned. All of it. Nothing kept. Nothing read. Nothing described to anyone. She said the family had carried enough, and that some doors were kinder left shut. I said, "Of course, ma'am." And I meant it. When she asked for a thing, it was done. But then she did something she had never done in all my years of service. She opened the box herself, in front of me, and she began to take the papers out one by one, as though she needed a witness before the fire took them. Most were letters. Her own handwriting, younger and steadier, on paper gone the color of weak tea. Letters to her husband during the war, when he was at the front of the nation's fear, and she was holding the household together, by will alone. Letters to her daughters, that were never sent. The things a mother thinks but does not say. There was a whole bundle addressed to no one at all, tied in ribbon, which I understood without asking, were letters to the dead. And then she reached the bottom of the box, and her hand stopped. There was a separate file there. Slim. Different paper. Official. In the way palace paper is official. She lifted it out and held it for a long moment, and I watched something move across her face that I had never seen in 19 years. Not grief, not anger. Something older. Something like a wound that has been kept open on purpose. She said a name then, the name that was never spoken at her table, and she said it not with hatred, which I had half expected, but with a terrible, exhausted precision, the way you say the name of a person who took something from you and got to keep their whole life afterward. The file, she told me, was the truth of 1936, not the version in the history books. The version the family had agreed, among themselves, never to correct. What the world had been told was a love story, a king who gave up everything for the woman he loved. What she carried in that file was, in her telling, something colder and more calculating. A man who wanted out, a woman who wanted in, and a country handed a fairy tale to cover an abandonment. I am not a historian. I cannot tell you which version is true. I can only tell you which version she believed, absolutely, until her last months, and that she had spent decades quietly assembling the paper to support it, never once using it. That was the part I could not understand as I stood there. She had held this file for 66 years. She had the standing, at any point, to shape how the abdication was remembered. She never did. She let the fairy tale stand in public, while keeping the case file private. I asked her, I overstepped, but I asked her, why she had kept it if she never meant to use it. She was quiet for a while. Then she said that some things are not kept to be used. They are kept to be true. That if she destroyed the file, then in 100 years, the only version left would be the pretty one. And her husband, her shy, stammering, dutiful husband, who died at 56, would exist in history only as a footnote to someone else's romance. The file was not a weapon. It was a headstone. It was the one place in the world where her version of her husband's life was written down and safe, and now she was asking me to burn it. I understood then what the request actually was. She was not asking me to destroy a document. She was asking me to let go of a grievance she had held for 2/3 of a century, to choose peace for the family over vindication for herself. In the very last stretch of her life, she was trying to put down a weight she had carried since she was a young woman, and she did not trust herself to do it alone. So we sat with the box open between us. An old woman and a servant, and 66 years of paper. She burned the letters herself, a few at a time, in the grate, the unsent letters, the letters to the dead. She watched each one go without a word, but when she came to the file, the truth of 1936, she stopped. Her hand would not do it. She had spent her whole life protecting that story, and she could not be the one to erase it. She handed it to me, and she asked me to burn it after she was gone, so that she would never have to know the moment it stopped existing. I told her I would. That was not entirely true. She died not long after, 101 years old. The nation mourned the grandmother. It had been shown for 70 years. The pastel coats, the horses, the gin at noon, the woman who seemed to have no enemies and no wounds. None of them knew about the box, or the file, or the winter afternoon by the window. In the days after her death, the household did what households do. Things were sorted, catalogued, quietly dispersed. The letters were gone. She had burned those herself, and I had watched the ash go cold. That much of her wish was honored completely, but the file remained. I had it, and I found that I could not do the thing I had promised. I told myself, at first, that I would burn it the following week. Then the following month, I moved it from place to place, and every time I resolved to end it, I heard her voice near the window. Some things are not kept to be used, they are kept to be true. To burn it would be to agree that her husband's life was a footnote. I found I could not agree to that. She herself had not been able to. Why did I imagine I could do for her the one thing she could not do for herself? So I kept it. Not to sell, not to expose, not to hand to a newspaper. I want that understood plainly, because there will be people who hear this and imagine a betrayal. There is no betrayal here. I have never shown the file to a living soul. I have never named its contents in detail, and I will not now. I kept it for the same reason she assembled it, so that somewhere in the world, her version survives. So that the shy king who was handed an early grave is remembered by someone as more than the brother who stayed behind. You may ask why I am speaking now, if I have guarded it so carefully. Because I am old too. older now than she was when I first entered her service, and I have come to understand the flaw in her plan, the same flaw in mine. A truth kept in a locked box is not preserved, it is buried. When the last person who knows about the box is gone, the box might as well be empty. She kept the file to defeat forgetting. But secrecy and forgetting arrive at the same destination. In 100 years, a burned file and a hidden file look identical. Both are silence. So I have chosen a third path. Not to destroy it, as she asked. Not to expose it, as she feared. But to tell you it exists. To tell you that the fairy tale you were handed in 1936 was, to the woman who lived closest to its cost, exactly that, a fairy tale. And that she spent her life, and her considerable talent for silence, making certain the true price was paid quietly by her family, and never billed to the man who set it in motion. That is the consequence no biography records. The Queen Mother's greatest performance was not the smile, it was the restraint. She held the evidence of a lifetime, and never once used it as a blade. Whatever you think of the old aristocracy she came from, understand what that costs. To be wronged, to hold the proof, and to say nothing, for 66 years, for the sake of an institution that would never thank you for it. The crown survived because women like her decided it would, and swallowed the bill. That is the room behind the door. I said at the beginning there was a thing she asked me to burn that I did not burn. You now know what it was. But there is one more thing, the sentence she spoke by the window, the one I have never repeated. I promised you I would repeat it, and I keep my promises, most of them. She was looking at the box. The letters not yet burned, the file not yet handed over, and she said, quietly, as if to the window rather than to me, I was not the good one, I was only the one who stayed. I have thought about that sentence for more than 20 years. The nation had cast her as the good one, the warm heart of the family, the grandmother without a shadow. And here she was, at the very end, rejecting the part. Not out of false modesty, out of a precision that never left her, even at the last. She knew what she had been. Not warmth, endurance, not forgiveness, restraint, not the absence of a grievance, but the lifelong discipline of never spending one. She was not soft. She was the hardest kind of loyal, the kind that costs the person doing it everything and shows the world nothing. The woman whose name was never spoken at her table, the American, the one the fairy tale was built around, got the great romance, got the freedom, got the whole life afterward, in the sun, and the Queen Mother got to stay, to hold the household together, to bury a husband at 56 and outlive him by half a century, to keep the file and never open the wound in public, to be called, for it, the good one, when she knew the truth was harder and less flattering and entirely her own. I was not the good one. I was only the one who stayed. That is the real inheritance of that locked room. Not a scandal, not a secret lover, not a hidden child, not the things people hope for when they hear that a royal kept a box no one could open. Just a woman's private accounting of her own life. More honest, in one whispered sentence, than 70 years of public smiling ever allowed her to be. She protected the crown. She protected her husband's memory. She protected everyone but herself, and she did it so completely that the world mistook the armor for the woman. I have the file still. I am an old man, and I have not yet decided what becomes of it when I am gone. Perhaps that is cowardice. Perhaps it is the same instinct that kept her from burning it herself. But I can give you the one thing she never gave the public, the truth that she was not simple, that the grandmother of the nation was, underneath, the most disciplined and most wounded person I ever served. And that her kindness, the thing everyone remembers, was not softness at all. It was a decision, made once, in 1936, kept for the rest of her life. That is who was behind the door. If this account moved you, understand that it does not end here. The locked room held more than one story, and the family it protected had other doors, some of them belonging to the younger daughter, the one who spent her life pressing against the walls her mother built. Next, I will tell you what it cost to be the Queen Mother's other child, the one who was not the Queen, the one who was never allowed to stay soft, and never forgiven for it. Her name was Margaret. Subscribe and stay close. These are not stories the palace tells, and they are not stories that survive if no one remains to tell them. I remained. For now, turn on notifications. The next door opens soon, and if there is a name you believe was buried too quietly, a name the fairy tales left out, leave it below. I read them all. Some of them I can answer.